Hello, you're watching Tell It Like It Is, and my name is Kathy Benuck, and we've got a really interesting show planned for you today. But I'm going to take 1 minute just before we get into all of that, because there are a couple of people I need to do a little shout out to. For those of you who know me, you know that the past couple of weeks I've had a couple of challenges that might have meant that we would have had to cancel this final batch of shows as we're coming into the election. Something I truly did not want to do for the obvious reason. You know, the election is just a few days away, and candidates had committed to come here, and that's a big commitment to when you're in the midst of a big campaign. I have to give a shout out to Rich Gerard of WLMW 90.7 FM, because literally within, I would say probably hours of him hearing the challenges that I was facing, he actually gave me a call and said, Kathy, you need to take care of yourself, and if I can come in and do those shows for you using a script or whatever, I'll be more than happy to come in and take care of it. And you know, that's a pretty big thing for somebody in the media to make an offer like that, particularly when they have their own tough schedule. So I think it's something that you need to know, because it speaks a lot to the guys. So Rich, if you ever get to see this, appreciate it. I also have to give a couple of other quick shout outs. In the confusion of all of this and trying to reschedule everybody and set up shows and the whole 9 yards, could not have been done without the patience, the caring, the commitment, and the professionalism of my director and cinematographer, Mike Currier, from CastleHill Media, because I literally have driven the man crazy for the past couple of weeks, and he's still here. I have to thank my husband, Jerry, who I have really driven crazy over the past couple of weeks and had him running all over town doing things for me. And I also have to thank Bill and Coleen from BCTV, because it meant a whole lot of changes to their schedules and plans here at the studio as well. And obviously, I have to thank all of the candidates who were so flexible and who adjusted their whole schedules so that we would be able to continue with the series. Had to say it, because we're at the end of this whole thing. Now, let's get on to today. We are going to talk about whether or not New Hampshire will have a state income tax. And my guest is Kevin Smith, who is the director of something now called the No Income Tax PAC. Kevin's a very familiar face to all of you by now, because this year he was a candidate for New Hampshire governor. It was his first run for a major office in the state, and I'll tell you, he proved himself to everyone to be a hardworking, energetic, and thought-provoking candidate who I think will have a very bright political future here in New Hampshire. Prior to running to governor, Kevin had already gained a reputation for getting things done, for being a consensus builder, so it's no surprise to see that his future involvement in New Hampshire issues will continue, and that issues that will be important to our future. And about a week ago, when I picked up the Union Leader one morning, I saw an article saying that Kevin is continuing his work leading up to the November election by now heading up the group called No Income Tax PAC that will help people to understand that by voting on question 1 on the November ballot, they have the opportunity to definitely decide whether New Hampshire will ultimately become a state in which a personal income tax is imposed on its residents. So with no further ado, I'm going to have Kevin walk us through this whole issue and give you the information that you absolutely have to have when you go to the polls on November 6th. Kevin, you're looking great. You look
Kathy,
rested.
you are too, and thank you so much for having me back on the show. And I just want to say, I think it goes without saying that those of us who know you, that watch the show, but know you personally, it's great to know that you're doing well and that you're able to finish out these shows, because you've done such a service for not only the people in Bedford, but in other communities as well that have seen your show. And I'm just very glad to see you in the studio here and know that you're doing all right. And
I appreciate the comment. And people are going to sit there at this point going, yuck, is this a mutual admiration society?
Well, no, I think they know again, those of us that know you and as I said, watch this show know that it's been great what you've done throughout the course of this entire campaign with having candidates in and other leaders as well. And so it's great that you're doing it.
Well, thank you very much. And I did want to give that shout out because, you know, people see me sitting here yabbering away. and they don't realize behind the scenes the
There's a
people
lot
that
that
make it happen.
Right.
And not to mention, as I said, the candidates themselves, because, oh, wow, it is not easy being involved in campaigning.
Right.
And, you know, when people take the time and the effort and the travel time and preparation and everything else to come on a show like this,
Sure.
I mean, I so appreciate it because I know what they're all contending with,
Right.
and just trying to keep life in some form of normalcy till the election's over. So, all
Yeah.
right, now
So
that
with
we've
that,
got all that, yeah.
right.
Well, first of all, tell us what this no income
Sure.
tax PAX is,
Yeah.
and its plan for action as we're zooming into
Yeah.
election day.
Well, what really struck me when I was running for governor was how few voters actually knew that there were ballot questions on the
Yes.
ballot this November. In particular, ballot question number 1, which is asking the question, should we enshrine a ban on an income tax in our state constitution? And so with the help of former governors Sununu, Merrill, and Benson, we're heading up this group, the No Income Tax PAC, to educate the voters about this particular ballot question, to let them know that not only is there a question on the ballot this November, which will essentially be looking for their opinion on having an income tax in New Hampshire, but also to tell them the importance on why they need to vote yes on ballot question number 1. And even though this is a constitutional question, which means in order for it to pass, it needs 67% of the vote because you're looking to amend your state constitution. So it's a high threshold. I think a lot of people are going to be looking at this question as a referendum on an income tax, on whether or not we should continue to have this conversation, so to speak, on having an income tax in New Hampshire. And so I think it's very important that the voters send a message to future legislatures, to future governors, and to the business community as well, to say, you know what, the time for the conversation is over on this. Because believe it or not, we've had many decades of conversations on whether or not we should have an income tax in New Hampshire. And the consensus among all parties seems to be, no, we shouldn't. In fact, there was this debate kind of played itself out in the Democratic primary this year. We had one candidate taking the pledge against an income tax, and 2 that didn't. And the one that took the pledge ended up being the victor in that particular race. So I even think Democrats have come around and realized that the issue of an income tax is a non-starter, and that it's really a losing issue, and that we shouldn't have an income tax in the future. So that's why this question is so important. The reality, though, is that because it is a constitutional amendment question, it's not worded as simple as it could be. For instance, if it were a straight-up referendum, do you support an income tax, yes or no? I think the numbers would be off the charts in terms of people saying, no, I don't support an income tax in New Hampshire. Because it's a constitutional question, it's got to be where it's a little more wordier. They have to word it in such a way that it fits into the Constitution. So, for instance, it says, you know, the legislature would be prohibited from implementing a tax on personal income of all natural persons, which may lead some people to read it and say, why does it say natural person? Well, all that means is that it doesn't mean it includes a tax on corporations, because as you know, we tax businesses right now, and so they would be excluded, and that's why the word natural is in there. But nonetheless, some people may read the question, be a bit confused by it. And often when that happens, people tend to either leave those questions blank or vote no by default. And so what we don't want happening is people that don't support an income tax also voting no on question 1. We want them to get them to vote yes on question 1, so that they understand it really is a referendum question on do you or don't you want an income tax. And if you vote yes on 1, that says it's now enshrined in our state constitution that we will not have an income tax in the state of New Hampshire. So we got 5 weeks or a little less than that now to spread the word and get it out there and let the voters know when they go into the ballot box, not only will they be voting on their future elected officials, but they have these constitutional questions to vote on as well. And that constitutional question number 1 is a very important question. And so we'll be reaching out through grassroots efforts, doing shows like this, and hopefully people in the community see it. There's other grassroots groups that have made up signs that say vote yes on 1, no income tax, and so people can request signs as well. There's a Facebook page set up for this. It's called Yes on 1, No Income Tax, that people can go on and get involved that way as well. And then we'll be doing some fundraising too, and hopefully raising some money to do some paid media work as well, to bring about more publicity to this particular issue.
Oh, sure, because it's so hard to get a message across to people. We all know that.
We do know that.
Yeah,
it took me 10 months.
There you go.
Although this issue is pretty simple and straightforward too.
Well, yeah or no, because what again I'd like you to do is plain out say to people, if you vote yes, this is what's going to happen. If you vote no, this is what's going to happen, so that they'll clearly understand.
Well, and here's the other thing too, is that you essentially can put voters into three categories on this question. Those who don't support ever having an income tax, who will vote yes on this question. Those who do support having an income tax, and they'll vote no on this question. And then you have this group in the middle that don't support having an income tax, but they're not sure whether or not we should enshrine it into our Constitution. And part of their reason is they say, well, it may tie the hands of future legislatures
I've heard that argument.
From that option. So let me talk about that a little bit, because in a sense I think it's a bit of a straw man argument, and here's why. If we ever have an income tax in our state, it's going to be for one of two reasons. Either there's an ideological shift in the legislature and in the governor's office such that you have a pro-income tax legislature and a pro-income tax governor, and they decide, you know what, an income tax is right for New Hampshire. And it'd be probably a very partisan vote of those supporting it and those against it. But that's one way it could happen right now in our state. The other way it could happen is what I call the Armageddon option. And that is that there's some calamity that takes place in the state of New Hampshire where, for whatever reason, Republicans and Democrats all of a sudden suddenly agree that an income tax is the only way out of this scenario that we're in. And if that were the case, there'd be broad support for it on both sides of the aisle, and the voters would be in favor of it. And what I would say is that that's all the more reason why we should have the ban enshrined in the state constitution, because what that does is it prevents the first scenario, the ideological shift. It prevents it from happening that way. So in other words, even if you had a very liberal group of people that came into the state house, they still couldn't vote for an income tax because it'd be in the state constitution. But if scenario 2 played itself out, where for whatever, and again, I can't even think of a scenario where that would be the case, where suddenly we'd all agree an income tax is the right way to go.
These days.
But if that did happen, it'd be simple enough at that point to say, okay, we're going to repeal the amendment out of it. We'll put it back on the ballot, repeal the amendment, and then pass it next legislative session. But to me, that threshold should be that high under that particular scenario. And that's why I think it's a good idea to have it in the Constitution now, because those people who say, well, it's going to tie the hands of future legislatures, they're saying that for one of two reasons. Either it's because they really do support an income tax and they want that option on the table for the future because it is something they would support, or they're saying it because of that other scenario I just mentioned, kind of the doomsday scenario. And if that's the case, well, then it should reach such a level that you would have to repeal it from the state constitution. And if that were the case, it should be easy enough to do that.
And even with a doomsday type passage of something like that, I mean, I think we all know that if they ever got it on, it would be almost impossible to see it end when the doomsday didn't exist anymore.
Well, that's true. Oh, absolutely. That's very true, Kathy. And yeah, because once you have an income tax, it doesn't go away.
Exactly.
You have it forever. And this whole idea that somehow implementing a new tax in some way either offsets or lowers other taxes historically is completely not true. It's a fallacy.
I wanted to talk to you about that, because one of the things I've heard people say over and over again, and I know you have as well, is that a state income tax is the most equitable form of taxation for all citizens, as opposed to other forms of taxation, and B, that its great big huge benefit will be that we'll all get to see our ever-growing property taxes go downwards.
Yeah.
Talk about that. Talk about what's happened in other places.
Sure. Well, let's take the first part of that question about it being, the most equitable form of taxation. I mean, when the school funding crisis first came about and Governor Shaheen was governor, she formed a commission to look at New Hampshire's tax structure and to look at all different forms of taxation going forward. And this was a commission, it was a bipartisan commission, but if you look at the people who were on it, these weren't people that were anti-income tax or people that were foes against income tax, but even they admitted in the report back when they had this commission, that by implementing a broad-based income tax in the state of New Hampshire, it would actually it would do harm to what they called New Hampshire's current progressive tax structure by having it set up the way mostly through property taxes that we currently do. That they were saying that it would actually do harm, having an income tax would harm that tax structure, and they didn't think it was a good idea to obviously do that. And so the other point of this too is that there are people, middle and low income people right now that are renting, as we know, and they're not paying a tax on their income, but they're also not paying property tax. What you would be doing now to these folks during a very difficult period, even if we weren't in a recession right now, is saying to these folks who can't afford a home right now, we're going to throw another tax on you, because you're not paying property tax, but now we're going to tax your income. At the time you can at least afford it, we're not going to be taking some money away from your income. So I would say to me it's not the most equitable way to be doing taxation right now. But let's talk about other states that have done this with the promise that, well, this is going to lower taxes in other areas if we do this.
And it was a promise that they sold their idea.
Absolutely. Well, and so New Jersey is a great example of this. Back in the 1970s, you had the state of New Jersey, which had very high property taxes, and the governor and legislature there at the time said, well, we're going to implement a 2% tax on personal income, and that's going to bring down the high property taxes that we have in New Jersey. Well, you fast forward now to the year 2012. New Jersey in the 1970s had the highest property taxes then. They now have the highest property taxes per capita now as well. In fact, there was no offset in the property taxes in that state. It did one thing in that state. It grew the size of state government and grew state spending out of control. And what was a 2% income tax back in the 1970s is today now a 9% income tax. 9% tax on income in the state of New Jersey.
Yeah, because they can keep raising it, right?
Absolutely. And they're paying the highest property taxes. Let's look at Connecticut in the 1990s. Same type of thing. They had high corporate taxes. So they, in that case, said, well, we're going to put in an income tax to offset the cost of business taxes in that state. Same scenario happened. Connecticut today still has high business taxes. They now have a tax on personal income. Oh, and by the way, they're paying the second highest property taxes in the entire country. So these broad-based taxes, when they're implemented, they do nothing to lower any other taxes. All they do is, as I said, they grow state government and grow the state spending even more than the levels it was at previously. The other thing too, especially it's true in the state of New Hampshire, is that your property taxes are mostly controlled at the local level.
That's right.
Believe it or not, they're not driven mostly by what happens on the state level. They're driven by what happens on the local levels. So the state can say all it wants of, well, we're going to put in an income tax to help offset, property taxes. However, there's no guarantee that your local community isn't just going to use that money for something else. And in fact, it probably would happen that way. And so, people hear this fallacy about, it's a pie in the sky argument to think that somehow that other taxes people are paying are going to be somehow lowered through the implementation of an income tax. I agree property taxes are too high in New Hampshire. But if you want to reduce property taxes, let's look at real ways to reduce property taxes through more economic development. You offset the tax base in towns, the more industry you can bring into a certain town, not downshifting costs from the state to the local levels as much as we've done over the last decade. There's all, and through targeting aid for education funding as well, something we haven't been able to do now in this state for over a decade as well. That would also help offset and reduce property taxes in towns that could really use it. But those are sound ways to reduce local property taxes. Putting in a new tax to do it, it would never happen. And it's only going to increase the tax burden on everyone in the state of New Hampshire.
And I mean, truthfully, when has government ever been given a chunk of money, even if it seemed excessive, that they didn't use up every dime of it?
They have. And when I worked for state government, I used to have a sign on my desk. Every day it would remind me. It said, government expands to absorb revenue and then some. And that's what happens, you know? That's
really.
usually what, and especially in a state, even when we have a surplus, right now in our state statute, it doesn't say that surplus at the end of a fiscal year. So at the end of the budget cycle, when you see, for instance, I just saw in the news today that Governor Lynch announced that the previous budget for the fiscal year is going to have something like a $13 million surplus in it. And it's unaudited right now. You know, I don't know if that's the true number or not, but that's at least what they're coming out and saying. But let's say it is.
It seems hard to believe.
It does. It does. But remember, we had a legislature that did right by the taxpayer, finally truly balanced the budget for the first time. By the way, this was a state budget that Governor Lynch threw stones at when it was passed. Of course, he didn't sign it into law. He let it become law. And now he's heralding the fact that there's a surplus, taking credit for it, as if he had anything to do with it. But let's suppose it is $13 million in the black. We have a statute that says that money doesn't go back to the taxpayers. That surplus goes into what is known as the rainy day account for future downfalls in the state budget. So even when we do have a surplus, even when we've taken in more than what we've actually spent as a government, we're still not even giving it to the taxpayers. We're putting it in this savings account for state government. So it's absolutely true. You know, the more money that comes in that they have to spend, the more they're going to do it. And that's what they would do with an income tax. But again, look, this question, whichever way it goes, is going to send a strong signal to, as I said, both the business community and future legislatures on the direction of our state and what the voters really want. And I would say that even if it doesn't get the 67% that it needs to pass into the Constitution, still having a high percentage of voters voting for this, let's say it's 60%, still is a pretty strong message from the voters to send to future elected officials that, you know what, take the conversation off the table. We don't want an income tax. And so I'm hopeful that it gets at least 67%. But even if it gets a strong majority, I think that still sends a powerful signal to legislatures and again to the business community. The business community wants certainty. And they don't want to think that, boy, could New Hampshire implement an income tax somewhere down the road? And given that, if we were ever to enshrine it into our state constitution, boy, what another powerful tool to reach out to businesses outside of New Hampshire to say, not only do we not have an income tax, we're never going to have an income tax because now it's in our state constitution that we don't have one.
That would be huge.
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you this. How much of a danger do you think does exist that should this not win on the ballot, that there'll be those folks who go, see, people don't mind. They don't have a problem with an income tax, and immediately start to do the manipulations to get something like that going. I mean, do you think that that's beyond the realm of reason for some of these folks?
I don't. You know, there's a saying in the NFL, any given Sunday, you know, a bad team can beat a good team. And I would say any given session, any given legislative session, you know, the wrong people get in, and we could have an income tax in this state. I mean, look at Maggie Hassan, all right? She's someone who supported an income tax back in 2002 when she first ran for state senate.
Yeah, she traditionally did, didn't she, all along?
And she lost.
Yeah.
And then when she started running after that, she realized what a lot of Democrats realize when they run on an income tax, that the voters don't want it. So she's now changed her position on it. She's taken the pledge now, even though she opposes this amendment, which I think begs, you know, calls into question her genuineness on not supporting an income tax.
Well, yeah, I don't understand that. How can you say you're against but not support the amendment?
And that's where I think some of these politicians are being disingenuous with the voters when they say that, because to me, that's code for I want to have this option on the table for the future. When you say I'm against an income tax, but I don't support this amendment either, you know, that means you want to keep the option on the table. If you truly wanted to take the option off the table, you'd support this particular amendment. But you know, let's suppose in my opinion, worst case scenario, Maggie Hassan gets elected and you have the Democrats take over the legislature, and they decide in that ideological shift, you know what, New Hampshire needs an income tax now because we don't have enough revenue to run state government. and Maggie, who we know has supported one in the past, says, well, I've got to agree with them. There's no way out of this. We have to have an income tax. Well, then it happens. So it could happen in a blink of an eye. And that's why it's all the more important to enshrine it into our state constitution, to know that it is taken off the table, that just because of an election gone wrong, we don't have an income tax because of it. The pledge is, some people think the pledge is a relatively new thing. It's not. The pledge actually dates all the way back to Hugh Gregg running for governor back in '52, I believe it was, when there was a lot of pressure at that time to have new taxes in our state, and he thought it was important to make clear that he wasn't going to support a broad-based tax in the state of New Hampshire. So he came up with this pledge to say we're not going to have a sales or income tax in the state of New Hampshire, and subsequently candidates running for governor have followed suit after that, and it's sort of like the New Hampshire primary has become part of our tradition of the pledge not to have. And guess what? To me, the pledge is not an ideological thing. It is part of our tradition as a state to say that we believe in limited government, we believe in limited spending, and that will only occur by not having a huge broad-based tax, whether it be an income tax or a sales tax. And it's part of our the fabric of how we run things here in the state of New Hampshire. And so I don't think the pledge is an ideological thing. I think it's something that candidates for elective office realize, that it's important to many citizens in our state that they're not overtaxed, that they're not overburdened with new taxes in our state.
And on the practical side of things too, there would be people who, if there were an income tax, would not really see an advantage to continuing to commute to Massachusetts or another state, and maybe doing without some of the services
or not
that
to
they had in those other states.
Sure.
I mean,
you got to remember now,
there would be an incentive for them to move back to those states.
There's an incentive now for people to try to find work in the state of New Hampshire and not outside of New Hampshire, because they are paying income tax to those other states. I talked about it often on the campaign trail. My father has been commuting to Boston, since the mid '80s, and so he's always been paying Massachusetts income tax. And he'd love to find comparable work here in New Hampshire to not be having to pay that. And when people are job prospecting and they're looking at the wages versus what they're paying in taxes, that is something they take into consideration. When they look at taxes they're going to pay in Massachusetts on their wages versus, maybe taking a little bit of less pay in New Hampshire, but keeping all of their money that they're earning, that is a cost-benefit analysis that they do. They wouldn't do that any longer. And as you said, there wouldn't be any consideration to, well, should I look for work in New Hampshire versus look for work in Massachusetts, because I know I'm going to be paying income tax in both states. And that's, a great analogy to that is right now we have a 9% tax on meals in the state of New Hampshire. That tax is only 6% in the state of Massachusetts. So if you're looking to go out to Applebee's some night, and you live in the Salem area, and you get an Applebee's right over the border or one in New Hampshire, well, guess what? You want to save a little money? You're going to go across the border because you're going to be paying less tax. I mean, taxes drive human behavior, and they would do that right here in New Hampshire as well.
Well, the time has flown, and
certainly
one of the reasons is because you're so compelling to listen to. We literally have
I think
seconds.
You're a compelling interviewer, Kathy. Let's get it straight.
No, it all depends who I'm working with. We literally have seconds. So I want you to look at that camera, tell people what they need to do and know on November 6th.
It's this simple. Vote yes on one, no income tax. And if you want to get involved, go to the Facebook page, yes on one, no income tax. Get involved in this issue and remind your friends and neighbors on why it's so important to vote on this constitutional question, ballot question number 1, yes on one, no income tax. Let's take an income tax off the table for the future in New Hampshire.
And we'll put up on the screen how to contact you if people want to jump in and help on this effort, because it's a fast, short one.
Absolutely. Sounds
Kevin,
great, Kathy.
I'm so happy to see you, and I know we'll have you back again.
Sounds
There's
great.
not the
Thank
slightest doubt in my mind. Thank you. Okay, we are definitely on the clock. So all I can do at this point is say Kevin once again delivered and gave you a lot to think of, and please do think of it when you go to the polls on November 6th. Thanks for watching, and until next time, bye-bye.